This case is messing with my vision. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. So remember that SG that we reviewed and it just wasn't quite up to our standards? This is what David decided to return that and get. It's a Gretsch George Harrison signature duo jet. Very different guitar, right? But it's very interesting, not something that we've seen on the show before. We've talked about the White Penguin and a few other Gretsches, like the Super Axe, which was vintage. But this is a really cool reissue of George's first good guitar, he called it. So that means this one is built to 1957 specs. Now, someone like me that's never had one of these in his hands before, that doesn't mean much. But the story is Harrison purchased this secondhand in the early 60s, so it's just a couple of years old at that point in time. And if you're not familiar with who George Harrison is, he's part of the Beatles. The Beatles took over the world. They were very influential in their era. Although I'd have to say my favorite guitar that he's known for is the Rosewood Telecaster, but you can check out this episode if you want to learn more about that. So these are $3,699 brand new. We've got these really cool Dynasonic pickups that I'm excited to check out. They should have an interesting tone to them. And what makes this different from other reissues that Gretsch makes? Some of them have different pickups. Other ones have different bridge stylings. I'm sure somebody in the comments can tell us more, but I think that's what makes this one extra special. And obviously, we've got the George Harrison signature on the truss rod cover that only these versions will have. And of course, we've got a cool Bigsby here, all our cool chrome hardware with the black. It really does look fancy, hump block inlays. But if you're curious about the construction of this one, think chambered out Les Paul, but with the top elements of like a 335. But we'll talk more about that on the workbench. But outside of the trippy tweed exterior, it kind of looks like a Lifton style case on the inside. That's pretty interesting. That whole pink look was just in this era. But look what we've got behind our headstock here. A cool little Gretsch banner. That's a nice touch. But what kind of case candy do these things come with? They've got a Gretsch envelope, which contains your certificate of authenticity. This looks like a vintage recreation of a guide of how to get the most out of your instrument, and it teaches you a little bit about how these things are laid out, and it tells you about adjusting the magnets of the pickups. These are actually pretty cool. Printed on some nice cardstock as well. I like this, the OK card. It did everything pass inspection. According to this dude, it did. Here's another cool little pamphlet, Gretsch Guitar Guide. Now you can pause here to read if you would like, but it tells you things about your Bigsby and general care of your guitar, how to string it up, the adjustment of your truss rod, as well as the bridge style, depending on which one you have on your guitar, the different body styles, all that good stuff. And apparently a directory if you want to keep that in there. Maybe for people who have worked on your guitar. And lastly, a 2-year warranty guide. And this was sleeping in the case too, a truss rod tool. First impressions here, I actually kind of like it. It reminds me of the Les Paul shape, although definitely different. This extends just a little bit longer. The bouts aren't quite as rounded, but this is so light because of the chambered body. But that would actually make a lot of sense because the Duo Jet was introduced in the year 1953. If you don't know, the Les Paul came out in '52. This was Gretsch's attempt to get into that solid body electric guitar market because Fender had what eventually became the Telecaster starting in 1950. However, as I've alluded to earlier, the Duo Jet is constructed just a little bit differently, but more on that later. And just like the Les Paul, it had quite a few different iterations. So it feels familiar to me as a Gibson enthusiast, but just a little bit foreign, but in a good way. I'm excited to check this thing out. So let's go ahead and do that now by throwing it onto the workbench to appreciate all of its different attributes. Found some pretty interesting things under the hood, but first let's talk about these pickups. So it's kind of like a single coil blunted with a P90 is the way it looks. So you've got these large pull pieces that you can adjust using these screws. You can see stock from the factory, they're staggered in a uniform pattern. But when you look down here, it's kind of like Gibson's Alnico 5 staple pickup. It has really extended pull pieces, and here you can see what those screws are adjusting. These brass colored blocks at the end of the piece. Then you've got some springs. And then the usual wrapped coils around the pickup. Now first I thought these were magnet bars, but they're not. It's just foam. And then we do have a spacer plate underneath there that these secure into. And then this was cool to me. It's kind of like a pickup cover mixed with a pickup ring. I was curious how that was working. Did they have to cut it and then install it? But no, it just rests right under our neck because it's raised up there a little bit, just like on an arch top. Although it's hard to see with this jet black finish. More of the same on the bridge pickup, except for you get double the foam for double the tone. As far as these pickups within the circuit, 7.91 k ohms in the bridge, 7.89 in the neck, and the middle just for fun, 3.98. But let's take a peek inside these cavities. So as we enter, we can go up our horns to where you can see this is just a routed out mahogany body, but you start to hit like this center block-like area. And now here we are on the other side of the pickup, over by the toggle switch. It's more of the same. It's not necessarily a center block, it's just an area right here to hold the pressed top together. It actually comes to like a wedged shape at the bottom. So think of it as something like this. How it's wide and then kind of comes to a taper before we get met with a solid block underneath here for our bridge. But now going back inside of our cavity to go the other way around our bridge, here we can see it's just a completely hollowed out chamber. It's kind of like a ES330 in that way, that it's not a complete center block, but you do have a little jut piece right there that allows you to secure the strap button and Bigsby into. And then of course our other side, we can see some of our electronics, but it looks like we have a back plate, so we can see that a little bit better later. So to recap here, you have a tapered little block right here. You've got a kind of solid block about this size right there for the bridge, and then everything else is just a chambered out mahogany body. And then the top is a laminate. So think ES335, how they do a maple poplar maple sandwich. This one, they just said it's laminated maple, so I would assume at least 2 layers, and then they press it in a machine to give you your whole belly carve without actually having to take a maple top and carve it down. So blending arch top elements with solid body construction is what the Duojet's famous for here. This has a floating bridge system. We'll carefully lift up so you can see it's not pinned. Please remember there are so many different versions out there, like the White Penguin was introduced in 1956 as a way to upscale the Duojet, make it super fancy, just like the White Falcon is the country gentleman on steroids. So if you check that video out, you'll see a Melita bridge, which is a really freaky looking thing. But this one has like a lipstick pickup looking bridge here. Gretsch calls it the rocking bar bridge. It's surprisingly chunky. Don't mind the other stuff on the scale, it's tarred out, but this weighs 3 ounces, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's chunky for a bridge. That's not a hollowed out tube, that appears to be solid. But it just sits on some posts that you have these thumb wheels to adjust. Then we've got the Gretsch by Bigsby tailpiece, the official model number B3C. Got an interesting cutout right there for stylistic purposes. We've got the rubber tip on it as well. And now here's where we pull things together. Why do we have to have this style that secures to the guitar right here, but not drilled into the top? It's because there's nowhere for it to go. It's chambered out underneath there. Only the bridge gets that center block, but as we just saw, this particular version technically doesn't even need it for the bridge. It's probably just to support the belly. But if you wanted to, you could install one. Here's our toggle switch for bridge, neck, and middle. Our master tone, it's kind of got a cool knob. Has the G for Gretsch, and then it points to what position you're at. Then your 2 independent volumes, and then basically a version of a tone control. And all this, they dressed it up with 3-ply binding, so take that, Gibson Les Paul standard. We're gonna upscale this to 3-ply binding. This is actually a really fancy guitar. I've always been a fan of the Gretsch White Penguin, mainly due to the rarity of the vintage originals. But hey, this really doesn't look that bad, even if it isn't quite as fancy. But here's our silver plexi pickguard. So you've got like a silver backing on it that has the Gretsch logo into it. Then kind of like how a mirror is made, it's a clear plastic on the top, and you're just seeing that gray material from the bottom. And then I thought this was kind of interesting. They space it using these 2 felt pads. Now thankfully this is a poly finish, so these will not react to it as if it was nitro. Then they also had these 3 additional sticky pads. They do not want you looking inside these guitars, because they actually covered over our screws, but thankfully they should restick just fine. As I was installing these back, I now realize why they do that. It's not necessarily a spacing thing. Those screws can be kind of sharp, and if you were to scratch this back plating, you would see it through the top because it would be damaged, so that's why they do it. That's cool. So, chambered out mahogany body, laminated pressed maple top. You've got the mahogany neck with the rosewood fretboard. This fretboard was extremely thirsty, and I think it just would have kept drinking and drinking, but it's got such a nice color. These are just regular acrylic materials. They're not mother of pearl or anything over the top. These frets look pretty good straight out of the box. I was impressed. The spec sheet says it is a 24.6-inch scale length with a 12-inch radius, and then I measure a 1.69-inch nut width, increasing to 2.07 at the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.84 and 0.92 by the 12th. Here's a look at that neck profile. They advertise it as a U shape, and I 100% agree with that at the first fret, but it kind of just transforms into like a regular C by the 12th. Doesn't quite have as much oomph to it. Moving on to our headstock. It's rather skinny. I'm sure it's an acquired taste. You get accustomed to it eventually, but it's really odd looking to me. It's kind of like the Gibson one, but without the wings. But it's single bound. You've got the Gretsch logo with your vintage small button style tuners. Here's what the truss rod looks like, easy to access. And a close look at our George Harrison signature truss rod cover. It does look like an engraving, but it's not. It appears to be silk screened on it, so be careful if you're ever cleaning it. The back is white. Moving on to the back side. Just like I was telling you, it is a flat back because it's just a solid mahogany body that's been chambered out. But you've got kind of an interesting triangle back plate. You can see our pots, as well as the solder work quality. Then I found this interesting that they actually bothered to put a tag on the inside. Like, it makes sense when you have an F-hole because you can see it, but this is just a little bit of reassurance that nobody's re-necked your guitar or something, I guess. Then you've got your master volume and toggle switch back plates as well. Output jack is located on the side, recessed into it. And something interesting about this particular model is the offset strap button. Normally it's just right here, part of the Bigsby, but it can get kind of cumbersome to get that over the strap, and then this is taking up the space. That's one theory anyways, but it also might have to do with balancing. I don't know, haven't tried one yet. We'll find out together. So this model has it in a completely different location, and Gretsch buttons are kind of cool. They're kind of like strap locks. You undo this part, you put your strap on, and then you put it on over top of it. Or if your strap is loose enough, I guess you could just put it over top of the whole thing. But your other one is right up here. And then look at this being fancy with a heel cap. Although what is slightly odd, the rest of the binding isn't quite as white as this. This is just really sticking out in your face, whereas the rest has just a slightly more yellowed shade of white. I wouldn't have noticed it had I not actually compared the two. So I wonder if those are made of slightly different materials. Well, this is kind of a cool area where the neck binding meets the body binding. And you do have quite a heel on these, but here's the back side of the neck. And then the headstock, we've got our open back tuner so you can see the gears. And here we go, 2023 serial number made in Japan. If you're kind of shocked by that, most of the high-end Gretsches are made in Japan. However, Fender does have distribution rights of Gretsch guitars. From what I've learned from comments of other episodes, Fender doesn't own the brand, but they're allowed to make and sell them under an agreement with the family that does own it. So you can find master-built, basically Fender custom shop made Gretsches out there that have like the nitro finish that have been aged. Sometimes they do like the paisleys, and they have lots of fun. But as far as the standard production models, from what I'm aware of anyways, they make them over in Japan, and they do a pretty good job. But all said and done, our semi-solid guitar is 7 pounds, 6.4 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. Before we electrify it, I just want to comment on its acoustic tone. It's actually quite loud. I could only imagine if they actually put the F-holes on it, so it would project quite a bit. So not quite an acoustic, but a little bit louder than a solid body electric. Very nice, open, and bright is the best way to describe the tones out of this. As far as the tone control, that's a real letdown. So 10, 9, 8. Around here, it starts to lose a little bit of that chiminess, but not a lot. 7-ish. 6. 5. But then between 3 and 2, it's just an absolute drop off. 1, 0. Now we know all about the Gretsch Duosonic. What are my final thoughts on this? I didn't think I was going to like it as much as I did. These Dynasonic pickups are ridiculously clear, but yet they still sound pretty good distorted, and you can adjust that tone control to whatever you like. There's maybe 3 or 4 good options on it in my opinion, but maybe a more experienced player would be able to get more tones out of it or see the uses of the other slight in-between positions. But pleasantly surprised is what I would say. Even if you don't want to play necessarily Beatles things on here, there are cheaper non-signature versions that don't have all the exact 1957 specs out there. So ultimately, if you like Les Pauls and you want to try something new from Gretsch, this is like a nice in between an arch top model and like a semi-hollow, but yet it still feels very familiar. But I was surprised I wasn't getting feedback or anything, probably because we don't have the F-holes, but yet it still has the whole resonancy of a semi-hollow guitar. So that was kind of an interesting phenomenon. The only thing, if I had to say something I didn't like, is something about this neck feels soft. I'm not sure how to really describe that to where the viewers would understand it, but like if this was a 5-piece maple neck or something, I think it would have a stronger feel to it. It's just something in my head while I'm playing it. It's like, that neck isn't quite as solid as other ones. The other thing being a black finish, I mean, it shows picking scratches, polishing swirls. I mean, even straight out of the box, it wasn't like 100% perfect. And it's a dust magnet. Mix that with the fact that the case super sheds. If you want a pristine guitar, you're gonna have your duster out with this one. But I love the whole black and chrome vibes. So, all right, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoy your newfound guitar knowledge. And once again, thank you, David, for sharing all of his new guitars with us. As of right now, this was the last one of his first batch of like, what was it, 5 or 6 guitars? So hopefully he'll buy some more with us in the future, but I would say he's got a pretty good haul waiting for him already. All right, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.